Well, seeing as we already had an episode in the future, it only makes sense to have our next episode take place in the past. So how about we have one in Victorian times, with Charles Dickens, and ghosts? Yep, that'll do. The Unquiet Dead follows the Doctor and Rose Tyler arrive in a late 1860s Christmas in a Victorian Cardiff. How random. Only to discover that dead have started walking among the streets. Teaming up with Charles Dickens, played by Simon Callow, they discover in a funeral parlour creatures known as the Gelf, beings made of gas having been sucked through the rift from the other end of the universe. Through the psyches of Gwyneth, played by future Torchwood Gwen Cooper actor Eve Miles, the Doctor discovers that these creatures have lost their home from the Time War, and there's nowhere else for them to go. They ask to inhabiting dead bodies to continue living, and the Doctor, having been responsible for the Time War, offers to help, despite Rose's objections of how wrong inhabiting dead bodies is. One thing I definitely liked in this episode is the atmosphere. Clearly a lot of research and effort has been put into the production design and lighting. With the end of the world, the production team had to go big and creative with their futuristic settings. Now here, they had to make the setting of a specific time period convincing. Speaking as someone who actually worked as a trainee in the art department, setting a time period can be very tricky. You cannot just make the backgrounds look like it, you have to make it feel like you have actually entered into a different dimension. Sure, it's a little odd how the setting is actually a Victorian Cardiff, but I appreciate the effort being put into making the actual surroundings look like a different time zone. The street lamps, the horse and carts, and the snow all over the floor. But what really worked for me was the lighting. The entirety of the episode is mostly shot in dark night with a cold snowy atmosphere, but you can really feel the warmth from the bright orange lamps and the chills in the air. I feel like we are actually in a Victorian street, and I feel like we are in a haunted environment. This is a gorgeously atmospheric episode. The story on paper might seem a little generic in terms of gothic horror stories. Stuff like a morgue, a seance, a character with supernatural gifts, kidnapping, zombies, an explosion at the end. But it's the execution that really sells it. This is a fun, historically gothic story. Everyone from the cast and crew seem to have had fun making this story come to life. I can imagine the makers wanting to go all out with their ghost zombies, but they have to keep this family friendly for all audiences. So despite them having to keep it PG and child friendly, they do actually make it creepy and spooky for kids. There are some small details from the possessed zombies that I actually quite liked, like the bright white contact lenses they use for the eyes. It's simple, but it's really effective. Even the Gelf in their actual ghost forms look really good. Sure, at some moments they may look a little fake, but for the most part, they look really good. Apparently they had like stand-ins actually stand behind the actors on the set. The visual effects artist had to rotoscope the human outline with a fiery flame effect. Good god, 15 years later, it still holds up. The only thing I'm not entirely sure is how the Gelf actually work. So these are supposed to be gaseous creatures, but are they flammable? If they cannot survive in fire, then why fly into street lamps or fire lamps? Okay, I guess you could argue they are protected within the blue gas section of the flames, but surely they would still be singed from the outer fiery areas. Also, it does feel a little contrived how Gwyneth, while a decent enough character, just so happens to be the only one with the psyche. I do also feel like she was just there just to set up for future plot points like the Rift or the Big Bad Wolf. However, watching it again, it really is Eve Miles' performance that really does save the character from being a little bit bland. Upon first viewing, I did think the story was flatly paced, with a few really chilling moments that legitimately scared me. But then again, I was a kid getting into the show for the first time. Watching it years later, some stuff like the character interactions I did actually appreciate a lot more, and having a better understanding to their backgrounds. However, there were a few small moments in between the characters which I did feel like needed to get going. I won't lie, there were some moments in which I nearly fell asleep. I do, however, appreciate that the pacing gives more room for the characters to breathe, in particular, the Doctor, Charles Dickens, and the Gelf. The Doctor, having gotten out of the Time War, is in a guilt-ridden path. Once the Gelf have mentioned that their home was lost in the Time War, he feels that it is his responsibility to fix it. He has already seen the deaths in the war, and he feels like it's his responsibility to save those dead souls by the use of recycling bodies. The Doctor's comment on having a donor card is actually a good comparison. Rose, of course, thinks this is wrong. thinking that it's best that we do let the departed rest in peace, only to be remembered. But the Doctor cannot see that, having only been involved in a time war. He is sick of seeing too many deaths, and he just wants to get out of the way. He does not want to see anything like the war happen again. Which is why I think it works so perfectly the moment the Gelf used his pity and compassion to backstab him in the end once the rift is open. It's so impactful towards the Doctor. He knows that not even he has the power to control life or death, which then leads him to question his own morality. And it's stuff like this which emphasizes the dark side of traveling with the Doctor, like the idea of you being born and raised in present-day Earth only to then die in the past. Now, as a child, I was a huge fan of Charles Dickens. Christmas Carol was one of my favourite books. My early memories and understanding of Charles Dickens were mainly from the 2001 animated Christmas Carol movie, which also starred Simon Cowell as Charles Dickens, which sadly no recent DVD releases feature those segments. And I remember coming to this episode thinking, oh my god, it's the same guy! We must be in the same universe! Even the stage setting looks so similar to the one in the movie. Charles Dickens in this episode is portrayed as a driven down old man, a celebrity who has been going on tour telling the same stories over and over again. You can tell he wants to tell new stories, but he knows that his audience would rather hear the old tales, so much that he is losing his edge, slowly losing his beliefs and confidence, and no longer believing in the supernatural stuff. That scene where he's describing Marley's face in the theatre, listen to how Callow is saying those two words. He is sick to death of saying the same lines over and over again, and he is trying to emphasize it up a little bit more. Then the Doctor comes into his life on the hunt to save his friend from some kidnappers, and acting like a fanboy towards him, talking about his other works. Just look at Charles Dickens' face in that scene. He is so happy to be doing something different that he lets his coach give chase. Even when he sees the ghosts and the dead walking about, he still cannot seem to believe it. He's trying so hard to find the man behind the curtain, but once the Gelf actually arrive, he cannot take it. It's only when he discovers how the real world affects the supernatural beings that he has finally gained his confidence and courage to go back and save the day, whilst discovering that there is so much more to the universe to embrace in a new way than he realizes. It's literally his own Christmas Carol. It's just so brilliant. One thing that did bother me watching it again was how dirty some of the dialogue sounded. I guess it kind of makes sense since it is Mark Gatiss writing it. Some of the lines kind of work, like this Undertaker who's clearly tired of his job, so he just makes fun of it when he can. And then you get the scene with Rose and Gwyneth commenting on men's body parts. I don't know, it just feels kind of awkward. But at the same time, everyone seemed to be having a good time saying these lines that it does kind of make me smile. I don't know, it might bother some people, but it didn't really bother me that much. Overall, this was a solid episode, probably one of the best out of the three. Does it have problems? Mostly nitpicks, but for the most part, I did have a good time. I heard most people saying that this was Mark Gatiss' strongest work in the revived series, and yeah, I intend to agree. Whew, so there we go, the first 3 episodes of the first season, and for the most part, I think this was a solid first run. Something I noticed watching these first episodes is how the stories have a flowing running character arc for the Doctor and the companion dynamic. The discovery of time travel, the possibilities of time travel, and the darker aspects of time travel. So what does the rest of this series have in store for us? Well, we'll have to wait and see for ourselves.